evening. Welcome to the February 23rd, 2021 meeting of the Dover-Sherborn Regional School Committee. My name is Maggie Sharon, and I call this meeting to order at 6:33 p.m. This open meeting is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020. Information on how to join remote school committee meetings and meeting agendas are posted on the Dover-Sherborn District website. Please note that this meeting is being recorded, and please be aware that anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. And we're going to begin tonight with community comments. And while I don't see a huge crowd here, as has been our practice for the last few weeks, we're going to take community comments for no more than 15 minutes. And that's really not to not allow people to speak, but just to make sure that we have time to do the business that we need to do tonight. Community comments are an opportunity for members of our community to be heard. We respectfully request that you make your comments brief and that you move the discussion forward by adding new information. Please try to avoid repeating points that have already been made. For community comments, please raise your hand and wait to be called on. When you speak, begin by stating your name and whether you live in Dover, Sherborn, Boston, or your connection to the community. Community comments are an opportunity for the school committee to listen to members of our community. It's not a forum for answering questions or engaging in a debate. Once the public comment section of the meeting has concluded, we will move on to our other business, and unsolicited comments from the community will no longer be permitted. This is standard operating procedure in the school committee meetings across our 3 school districts. Thank you. So I'll just begin by asking, is there anyone here this evening who would like to make a community comment? Going once, going twice. All right. This community comment section of our meeting is closed. Moving on to the next item on our agenda, it's our financial report. I'm going to turn it over to Dawn, and I want to send a special welcome out to Robert Brown, our auditor, and he's going to present for us our audited financial statements. Dawn?
Right, so I am welcoming Bob with us this evening, as well as John, your new treasurer, who this is the first time I think that he's joined us for a school committee meeting. So he's going to sort of, add a few of his comments to the financial statements after Bob does his presentation, and then just take a few minutes to say hello to all of you. Great. So I will tell you, your statements are hot off the press that you received this afternoon. We were making a few last minute changes as early as about 10 or 10:30 this morning. So I thank Bob and his firm for making sure we could turn around and be at the meeting tonight. And so hopefully you've had a chance just to peruse them. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bob just to sort of give you an overview and an update of our fiscal year 20 audit.
Good evening. The audit for fiscal 20 went well, despite COVID circumstances. Also, despite COVID, it really didn't impact your financial statements in 20 terribly much. Obviously, it affected your operations, but there wasn't a significant financial impact. The big change in fiscal 20 was the preliminary funding of the Post-Employment Benefits Trust Fund of $500,000. So that puts the district in good shape to plan on going forward, making that part of your annual operating budget, the contribution to that. And also, as a result of the new actuarial study, the discount rate was increased to 3.75 from 3.25. So that also helped whatever the results would have been for fiscal 20. Other than that, everything went smoothly. Dawn and her team do a good job. And we did well to get this audit out. This is the first larger community or district we've issued so far this year because of the delays in 19 during the COVID, which moved into 20. We have a lot of town clients who are shut down to the public, and it makes for an inefficient audit when you're trading emails for documentation. But this one's issued today, and there is a we did put a footnote in there regarding COVID because obviously it is impacting operations more into fiscal 21 as opposed to fiscal 20, and talks about some of the grants available. Other than that, I'm open for questions.
Thank you so much, Bob. A question from Michael.
Yeah, my question is, I actually like to read this stuff, and I didn't have the chance to do so today, but I really want to kind of go through it. Should I direct any questions to you, Dawn, or to you, Bob?
Yeah, you can send them my way, and then I can touch base with Bob, because some of them I may be able to answer.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions about the audited financials?
If I might.
Yeah.
So good evening, and let me begin by saying thank you for having us this evening. And also, I want to express my sincere appreciation, since I haven't met you all in person, and this is our first time to speak. I do want to thank the entire administration, especially the superintendent and the business administrator, for not only welcoming me, but we got right into business. One point I wanted to make, and Bob brought it up about the OPEB. You'll notice when you read the statements that the balance at the end of the year was approximately 504,000. Excuse me, on June 30th. As of January 31st, that figure has grown from 504,000 to 599,000. So almost a 20% increase in the last 7 months. Obviously, that's because of the good performance of the market, but it does show that over the long term, having these assets invested with Vanguard through PARS, I think is the best way to go. This is one of 3 districts that I've been associated with that has used Vanguard, and I can say that all 3 have been very pleased with it. We've been in it at my former place of employment for 7 or 8 years, and we've been very happy with them. So I think the ongoing performance as well as ongoing funding is, as Bob said, going to put us in very good position relative to our assets for OPEB. So, but again, thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure so far, and I expect it to continue to be so.
Thank you, John, so much, and thank you for your good work on our behalf as our new treasurer. We're really excited to have you on board. It's nice to hear that about your thoughts on our decisions about how to invest the LPEB funding. I know for those of us who are part of the Employee Benefits Subcommittee, that was a big task to take on in the last couple of years. And for anybody who's on the call who isn't sort of up to speed on what we are talking about, because the region is its very own municipality, we also carry all of the expenses related to future retirement employee benefits. So that's, our retirees' health insurance and other assorted costs that go with supporting retirees. And so one of the changes that we made related to accounting standards that changed was that the future liability of that was moving onto our balance sheet, and some of you who are accountants can explain it a little better than I can, but that was really going to impact our long-term security in terms of being able to borrow money or for future projects that we might do. And as part of that, trying to manage that, we've begun setting up an OPEB trust fund, and that's money that we set aside, which we were able to set aside because of some changes that took place at community ed and some money that was sitting there, as well as we made changes a few years ago to employee health care that has reduced our costs, but also changed the structure of benefits. And we were able to put that money, some of that savings aside. And basically what that's doing is securing the security of the retired employees' benefits for the future, as well as putting us in a more stable financial position. So I'm not an accountant, so please feel free to fix that explanation, but I think there's a number of people here who just might be like, well, what is all this OPEB stuff? Yeah, Michael.
I'm sorry, I did go to the OPEB page just to kind of take a quick look. And one comment is there's just a small typo on page 39, but also it's the calculation is as of 2018. Is that periodically recalculated? And if so, what
It
is
is.
the interval of recalculation?
It's every 2 years. So Odyssey Advisors is our actuarial consultant that does that for us. So that will be updated. And we'll also, just so you know, the discount rate, we'll probably see an increase in that too, now that we've actually had a year where we've had the investments funded, and that we're going to show that we're going to invest again this year. So that small increase from 3.25 to 3.75 was just because we took a baby step. As we continue on down this path and show that we're going to adhere to our investment policy, our funding policy, I would say, we'll just see that discount rate go up, which directly is going to reduce the liability that we're carrying on the financial statement. So there's a lot of estimates and data points that go into this, and it can change when he does the update. They could have all kinds of new actuarial data that they use. So it's one of those constantly changing numbers. So the things that we can control, we try to control, but there's some things that you just can't control. So it's one of those funky sort of accounting issues for sure.
And just as an ancillary benefit, this is also very beneficial to the district in terms of if we need to issue debt in the future, the rating agencies look at this and realize not only do we have assets starting to build up, but that the district is being well managed because we're actually addressing these types of issues. So I think it has a great deal of positive impact to the district.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Maggie, of John?
Of course.
So John, it's amazing to me that after the millions of conversations we've had on this, I've never really thought about this particular question. But at what point does a municipality or a school district, in our case, call on those funds? Is it just as a backup, or is there a time that you actually draw on those funds?
Well, in theory, there's a long course of accumulation that's going to take place. If in fact we were ever, now actually in terms of the liability for the district, it's not outrageous compared to some districts that I have seen. But at some point, when the funding is adequate, yes, you would draw on those as a supplement to other sources of revenue for those expenses. But I don't see, depending, I mean, if we got a windfall, for example, and really put a windfall in there, but most of the time it's a gradual buildup. And I would say, you're talking 15, 20 years before you would be in any kind of position to even think about using some of the funds.
Gotcha.
And what is the target funding percentage ultimately?
Well,
Stated differently, what percentage of the liability would be like the optimal, if you could wave a wand, or when we would stop and say, okay, we're well funded?
Don, did you want to?
well, I was going to say, I mean, they track the funding percentages at the state level, and so you really, I mean, you think your goal is to 100% fund it, and then you could continually draw from it to cover the cost. So there's
right. Theoretically, if you got to 100%, you would be using those funds. Those funds would be generating the same amount of your expense on an annual basis. So that would be in theory, but again, like I say, not many of us will be sitting on Zoom when we get to 100%. I can say that.
Yeah. But you'll see, you can look and see it. There's the state tracks the funding percentage of towns, and if I remember correctly, Dover's pretty up there as a town. I think they're in the top 10 as far as funding, because they had a windfall that they used to put into theirs, as I understand. So you can see, actually, they do track it, and you can see where people stand. Sort of interesting list to look at.
And if the bottom fell out for some reason of a municipality or a district, I mean, those funds could, in theory, be tapped as long as they're being used for the health insurance.
Purposes, exactly.
It's not something we'd ever want to do, but again, last year at this time, I don't think we would have thought we knew anything about this pandemic. So you never say never, but it is designed to be a very long-term accumulation.
Well, thank you, guys. Are there any other questions from members of the committee regarding OPEB or the audited financial statements or anything on that accounting topic? Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Brown. My spouse is an accountant, a CPA, and so I very much appreciate all that you do.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to work with Dover-Sherborn.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you, Bob.
All
I'm just
right.
gonna, Maggie, I'm just gonna add one other thing that's on the memo regarding with the financial statements is
Yeah.
that we finally did receive our notification of E&D certification. And so I wanted to make the committee aware of that and to let you know that we were in excess of our 5% by the $97,920, which we did allocate based on the fiscal year 20 assessment percentages and we reduced the town's March assessment payment. So those funds are being returned by way of us reducing. So when you see your next financial statement in March, we're gonna start carrying a negative variance for assessments because we're not gonna collect all that we thought we were gonna collect because we gave back the $97,920. So I just wanna let you guys know that, and the towns both have received notification for that so they could adjust their payments accordingly.
Are we likely to always get, is E&D always come in this late or is this COVID related? It seems late.
It is sort of late, but I looked at last year and we weren't much later. They have like really, the E&D certification is what I've learned is put on the back burner. It's like one of the filler work. And so if there's other tax rates that need to be set or something else, unless you need access to your E&D, they don't feel like it's a priority to get done. So if I did reach out, and John started reaching out on a monthly basis, because in order to be able to start talking about using E&D for your budget for fiscal year 22, we needed to have a certified E&D. So we sort of pressed them a little bit, but I do think they sort of cleared the desk because at the same time, Andrew got notification that Minuteman, who same team at DOR is assigned to them, like the next day got their E&D certification. So they must have gotten to a point where they cleaned off their desk of any files they had for, regional schools E&D. But it was a little bit of a task, and John will admit to that. We spent a lot of time following up.
I think there are some regional and personnel differences in terms of how this happens. I'm used to having this happen to us also in the past. But then again, if you get a different, if it's assigned to a different regional office and or personnel, that, so we will stay even more on top of it next year and say, come on, but I'm not promising any different result.
Right. So just so you know, we filed it in late August, early September. So that's.
Yeah, early September.
Yeah. So.
Right, fantastic. Well, thank you. And thank you for all of your work, John and Dawn, and Bob left us, but on getting the audit done and sort of sorting out our annual financial report. Moving on to the next item on agenda, it's our Dover-Sherborn regional budget continued discussion. And I know you were doing all kinds of work on this today and that the health insurance people met yesterday and you have some news for us, but it's not in our packet, right? It's just an update you're going to give us verbally.
No, they have all the information's in the packet. There's a couple schedules and I'm going to try to screen share.
Okay, great.
So let me see how this works. Okay, so I'm going to start with, here we go. Okay, so if you recall, so what I'm trying to do tonight is to take you from the version of the budget that you saw in December and bring you to where we are today, so that tomorrow night when we meet with the two finance groups, I'm talking about the budget in total versus in pieces. So what I'm trying to do is take you from where we started in December, new information that we've received that's changed budget line items. And then tomorrow night, we'll just talk about where we are now. And as always, we have a clean slate. So if we,
Dawn, we can't see your screen yet.
You know what? Just if anybody else is following along in the packet, I had missed it. It's page 63 of the packet. And then, yeah, your screen sharing is just black.
that's weird.
Yes.
It's weird because I can see it. Oh, wait, hold on. Why does it say I'm paused? Hold on 1 second. I don't know why it says it's paused. Oh, maybe because I'm recording.
Oh, maybe.
Okay, it's not letting me show. That's weird. Okay, so we can, does everyone have their packet then?
I mean, you can mail it to me, Dawn, if you'd like, and I can try and share it.
If
Yeah,
we
that's
have it and you talk us through it, it's okay.
Yeah, I'll
We're on
talk you
page
through it.
63.
So,
Okay.
so let's start with revenues. And so your revenue adjustments, remember, anything that more revenue that we can take in actually is going to help the towns, and then it's going to decrease their assessments because it's money that we're covering from other revenue sources. So as you know, we usually start the budget in December with our fiscal year 21 chapter 70 because we don't know anything, right? And so we always wait for the governor's budget to come out. So the governor's budget did come out in the third week of July, and we are seeing an increase over fiscal year 21 chapter 70 of 46,760. So we're going to update our chapter 70 revenue expectation to that the cherry sheets from the governor's budget. So that's going to pick us up $46,000. The committee approved the increase in the high school activity fees to $75. So taking the number of students that we typically have and doing that increase of $30, we're picking up an additional $9,000 of activity fees, which will now be incorporated into your new version of your budget. As we've done in the past, whenever we have revenue surpluses from Chapter 70, Chapter 71, or any other non-assessment revenues that we didn't know about last year, we give credit to the towns for that. So as you remember back in June, everyone was really worried about what was going to happen to the fiscal year 21 budget. And we were all told to take some E&D and apply it to reduce the Chapter 70 number that we've been carrying in our budget because the fear was we weren't going to see those kind of numbers. So we approved $200,000 out of E&D to reduce your Chapter 70 estimated budget. As that played out, as you know, and you can see in your financial statements, we're carrying about $160,000 surplus because it didn't turn out to be as bad as we initially thought in June. In addition, on the Chapter 71 for your regional transportation, remember we sort of had the same thoughts. So we took the excess of Chapter 71 that we had last year and put it in the regional transportation fund. And that was going to be our safety net just in case Chapter 71 reimbursement was something less than we thought based on our cherry sheet. So that did come in a little bit less, but not to the extent that we thought, mainly because they ended up giving us an 83% reimbursement, which is actually pretty high. We traditionally had been seeing 70,000 and it's been slowly upticking, but 83% was actually a pretty healthy number. I will be honest, we still haven't gotten our first payment yet, but based on what we filed in our end of the year report and knowing that they've said it's 83%, I've calculated what our estimated payment will be. So there's $50,000 from that 86,000 that we don't need. And so we're also going to use E&D and credit the towns for that excess revenue that if we had known, we would have given them last year, but we didn't know. So we're going to give it to them this year. So that's $210,000 of E&D we're going to use that represents really a timing difference in revenues. So included in your packet is the updated sort of revenues, just so that you can see that all play out with the Chapter 70. On Chapter 71, I will point out that I'm not using the cherry sheet from the governor's budget because that is actually based on the lower transportation costs that everyone filed in fiscal year 20 due to the closure. So if I took the chapter 71 off the cherry sheet, it's only like 410,000. I know that's not what we're going to get. And so I don't want to underestimate that. So I'm going to leave right now, I'm leaving the chapter 71 at our cherry sheet from last year. And I think if anything will be a little bit higher, but that's better than using the cherry sheet from fiscal year 22. So that's one place where I think that the town should see that we're actually being sort of not conservative, but aggressive on that, because I don't want to end up with a surplus in that arena. So just that's why that number looks exactly the same, because I felt like it just was safer to use that. But then you can go through and you can see how your revenues look for this version of the budget. Any questions on the revenue side? Okay. Oh, Michael.
Yeah, just I think I have the answer to this, but I just on the first page, the revised operating expenditures are a 0.87 increase, but then the total assessment is 0.76 increase.
Mhm.
And so the difference of that is the other non-assessment revenues. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, thanks.
Correct. So if you look at your revenues, you'll see there's like 22.8, I think, is the 22 million is sort of the assessments, and so the rest of it, the 4 million. So you look at revenues, you have to look at the pieces. So that is always confusing, but the assessment percentage changes don't really have a lot to do with sometimes your budget, because also built into that is your minimum local contributions that change from year to year, and also your operating census percentage. So that those are all two factors that play into the assessments. Maggie.
Don, can you just clarify for me, because it does appear that, even with all this, that Sherborn's assessment goes up and Dover's assessment somehow goes down. Can you explain why that is? And
exactly, yeah. So I did give you an updated assessment calculation too, that sheet that has a bunch of numbers on it. So so what it's based on is that for this version of the assessment calculation too, I'm using the new minimum local contributions that came out in conjunction with the governor's budget. So they've gone and they've reassessed what the local contributions should be to the towns based on their wealth factor, their income factor, and then the foundation budget from the state. So there's a whole big complicated calculation that goes. And if you look at the relative changes from fiscal year 21 to fiscal year 22, Sherborn is actually seeing a much larger increase in their minimum local contribution than Dover, which is actually a good thing. Dover, I think Sherborn was expecting to start seeing an increase because they knew they were bringing more property online, which was actually going to make them look like they had more more assets or more revenue to be able to fund their own school operations. So we weren't surprised to see that, but there was a much larger increase in the Sherborn's minimum local contribution than what Dover was seeing. So that plays into how the assessments shake out, because we have to dollar for dollar take that and assess that to those towns directly. And then what's left is what we spread based on the assessment percentage, based on students enrollment. And as you remember, Sherborn had about a 0.65 increase in their assessment percentage, because relatively they have a few more students compared to Dover percentage wise. So they saw a swing of 0.65. If you want to put it in relation, a 1.0 change in the assessment, let's say, is roughly about $200,000. So if our budgets all stayed the same, but there was a 1% change in the operating assessment percentage, a town would automatically pick up, say, $200,000 without us doing anything. So that's sort of the volatility of the assessment percentage. So those two factors is why you're seeing an increase in Sherborn's assessment relative to Dover's.
Thanks, Dawn. I appreciate the clarification.
So Don, the translation on one level is obviously increases in numbers of students being sent by Sherborn, but also the good news is that we've had enough building and growth in Sherborn that the state now feels like we can contribute more.
Correct.
And so it's a double-edged sword, right? On one
Right.
hand, we wanted to see more growth so that we can cover our costs in Sherborn. On the other hand, we get penalized because we've seen more growth. And therefore, the town can pay more.
Right. And on the assessment calculation page, you can see, I think I leave like 10 or 11 years. So you can see that the number, there's about a 2% range where that is always, shifting a little bit here and there. Sometimes it's, a larger impact and sometimes it's a smaller impact, but that just is part of the assessment formula and the regional agreement.
Thank you.
Okay, so that is the revenue side. So most of the activity that we're going to quickly go over, or not quickly, but go through tonight are on the expenditure. So remember, in December, we don't have a lot of information, so it is our version 1.0. As of today, we have a lot more new information to share with you. So the first line item, and these are by function code. So if you looked at your larger sheets, you'll see that I'm going in order of sort of how it falls, and you can see what categories they go in. So the very first one is, now that we're past the February 1st date, we can take account of any educator retirements or staffing changes. So we have a couple at the region, which is going to result in savings of about $145,000 in salaries. We are obviously taking some positions that are higher on the matrix and replacing them with staff that are not on the very low end of the matrix, but in a sweet spot where we feel like we can get a good quality person. But this is also a good time to sort of reset some of our salaries for teachers, which is what we tend to do, so that both towns can sort of reap the benefit of those retirements and reset those clocks. So that's giving you $145,000 savings. In version 1.0, there was a discussion initially back in December that we were going to change the software system for our IEPs, but that has been decided not to move forward with that in fiscal year 22. So we're removing that increase that we had put in, we're taking it away, and that's the $7,500. We've also looked at our special ed grants, and based on the numbers, the grants we've been receiving, we want to take one of our educational assistants from the general fund and add them to the special ed grants. So we are giving some relief to the general fund by utilizing more grant funding. So that's a reduction of $30,250. In addition, if you know, over the last couple of years, we have the QPO built into our evaluation system, but it hasn't really been running the way that I think it initially was when we put the stipends in the general fund budget. And so we are, just for purposes of not continuing to have those as surpluses every year, and so we figure out what what you guys want to do with the evaluation system. We just want to move that funding from the general fund to our Title IIA. And when the QPOs first started, they actually were funded with Title II funds. And then they were brought into the general fund. So we're just sort of going back to where we started. And this gives us flexibility to do whatever the evaluation MOU agrees to, but it sort of takes away, if they decide not to do something with it, I don't have to carry those surpluses, and it's giving a small break to the towns because we can use title funding for that. So that's just removing $20,000. Knowing our students that are coming on campus next year, we know there's a little increase in the special ed transportation that we're going to have to be outsourcing. So you have about $9,200 in the budget right now. I need to bring it up to about $15,000. So we're adding $5,800 into special ed transportation. If you remember, I think a year ago, so I mentioned to you that we had engaged a firm called Spyglass to do a communications audit for all of our telephones across the district. So the contract with them was that the year that you do it, you had to pay them a whole year of the savings, because that's how they make their money. And so we watched it all sort of play out, and we're comfortable now that we can say that we are going to reap a $7,000 benefit from that in savings. So we're reducing our telephone utilities by $7,000 for next year. And a lot of that was making sure all of our phone services were on the state contract, which is a much lower rate than regular phone accounts. We really cleaned up our long distance. I think some of our long distance accounts, and this is across all 3 districts, we were paying like the old fashioned where, 65 cents a minute. And so definitely had 1 or 2 accounts, not at the region, but I think at my locals, that were paying that rate. So it was nice to clean all that up. And the result was that we're actually reducing, I think, our $24,000 or $26,000 telephone bill down by $7,000. So we're taking that reduction. The other good piece of news, and this is where actuarial assumptions come into play. We received our projected assessment for Norfolk County retirement. So these are for all the employees. So the non-teaching positions, because they're at MTRS, we do actually, and the state covers that retirement, we actually do cover Norfolk County. And they did an updated actuarial evaluation that for the region involved a lower covered payroll number than we've had in the past 2 years. And also they are using some pension reserves to offset the assessment. So combining those 2 things, we had in your version 1, had to increase the Norfolk County retirement by about $78,800. I'm going to be able to take that whole increase away, plus an additional $36,000, because our assessment for fiscal year 22 is actually less than our assessment for fiscal year 21. And I can tell you, for the first time, they've given us 2 years worth of assessments. We're going to see that level, not a reduction, but we're going to maintain that base for fiscal year 23 too. So this will be something we'll be able to take advantage of for the next 2 years. And then we had our meeting with Maya for all of our property, workers' comp, professional liability insurances, and their rates are coming in a little less than I had projected. So we're able to take $3,500 off those accounts. And then the big news yesterday was that West Suburban Health Group held their board meeting, and we approved the rates for fiscal year 22. If you recall, I assumed an 8.5% increase for your version in December. And the rates, with the help of using some fund balance reserves, so the rates that were approved were actually subsidized by about $4 million worth of reserves, put us in a composite rate of more like 3.4% versus the 8.5%. Our share of employees predominantly are in Harvard Pilgrim. That's where the majority of our employees are, and that came in at 4%. So recalculated your healthcare expenses for fiscal year 22. It was able to reduce the initial increase in version 1 down to $95,000 from $195,000. So we reduced it by $100,000. So that was excellent news that came to fruition yesterday. And part of that too is, if you think about healthcare, they are seeing a pretty large fund balance right now. As of June 30th, they have an $18 million fund balance. Partly that is that everyone was sitting at home and not utilizing healthcare. So the unknown is how this is all going to play out once things open back up. I mean, obviously there's some healthcare that you can't go back. Some visits you're not going to go back and have them 4 times. You're just going to have 1 and catch up. But elective surgeries and things like that, when they totally shut down, they weren't seeing the expenses. And COVID, relatively, West Suburban Health Group didn't see a large increase in expenses due to COVID. So how that's all going to play out is sort of the big unknown. But the positive is that if you've been around and have heard about West Suburban several years ago, there was the concern that they were going to go negative fund balance. So it's amazing to think now that as of June 30th, they have an $18 million fund balance. So that was all good news yesterday. On the flip side, we've been talking about OPEB, right? So part of the way that you're funding your OPEB is that we are working on decreasing, because we have a 4-year plan to decrease the cost share for our retirees. We started at a 70-30 split. The goal was to get to 50-50. We were going to take those savings from that 70% to 50%, and that was going to be our funding for OPEB, so that we weren't going to be asking the towns for additional monies. So that is the plan. But in order to keep pace with the premium increases, though, we don't want to erode away the cost share savings by the premium cost. We are looking for a $25,000 increase in that line item just to cover the premium cost for fiscal year 22. And that way we can maintain our cost share savings and be able to contribute that to OPEB. So with all that mumble jumble, we're looking at almost a $400,000 decrease in the version 1 budget presentation versus version 2.0, which gets us down to really less than a 1% increase over fiscal year 21.
So the headline here is that by being patient and waiting for all these numbers to fall into place, this year we've done really, really well, and our budget's going to look really tight in a good way.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
What questions did you have more to add, or do you want me to take questions?
No, you can take questions. I think I hit all the highlights.
Questions from folks? Ann, and then Michael.
Thank you, Don. I always appreciate that you go through and explain it to us. I didn't quite catch all of it, but if I get 75%, I'm good. So thanks. So you mentioned we don't know what's going to happen certainly with healthcare and what's going to happen with those costs. Are there any other things that we're concerned there may be unintended or increases that happen as we go back to the new normal?
I think that, so if you remember, one of the assumptions when we built this budget that we would be back in normal operations 5 days a week, right? If we're still in some of these situations where we're having to make accommodations, the good news is that there has been continuing releasing of federal funds that I know we have set aside that's going to be able to cover that. So we didn't put anything into the normal operating budget because we know we have funds that are given to us, several different pockets of funds that we have, and they have extended those funding opportunities for us to use both in fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23. So there's some longevity to that funding so that we can, decide what we need to do. If we have, say, learning lag that we're worried about once people do come back, we have pockets of money where we can go get extra support and staffing for the students. So I think with that, I feel that we are in a good situation where we have funds set aside to cover us if unexpected things come up, or if we have to continue purchasing. We've got a good stock of PPE, so even if we have to continue having some PPE on site for next year, I think we have that because there was such a scare back in the summer to get every mask you could find on site. And I think we've been very strategic and prudent about where we've spent our money for COVID to make sure we've been very strategic about it and not just willy-nilly. So I think compared to some other school districts, I feel like we're in really good shape in some of the decisions that we've made as far as the extra costs associated with learning in a COVID pandemic.
Yeah, to that end, if you look around surrounding communities, some of these places have had to go back to their towns and say, we need another $1 million. It's not actually that unusual at all. I don't know if it's our luck or our diligence in terms of not being wasteful or just the way we've done our testing through AFC, but we seem to have really hit on some important, wise decisions that have allowed us to not spend a ton of money. One of the good fortunes, by the way, was the fact that you guys approved the one-to-ones for the middle school, and it just so happened that we really needed Chromebooks in the system. That was a huge help, and it saved us a lot of money. Granted, it was money that had to be paid for it by the townspeople because it went in the budget, but it wasn't a hit that showed up as a result of the coronavirus. So I'm really proud of where we are and what we've done this year, and these numbers that we're putting forth to the communities. And by the way, they're good at the local level as well. We've done well. We've had some good fortune. It's also, hugely helpful when people retire, especially if they're top step teachers. Obviously, that saves us money. But we try really hard, and I want to say this tomorrow night as well. We try really, really hard to pass those savings on to the community, not say, oh, gee, well, we have a $45,000 savings there, so let's spend it on this. We actually try to pass it on. That's the whole zero-based budgeting, or what do you call it, Don?
Trend budgeting.
Trend budgeting. But it's the other thing that's really important for me to point out that I think is hugely impressive from my standpoint is Don has always, in the 4 years that I've been here, been able to bring these budgets in less than 1% from where we targeted. And that's not that easy to do when you're talking about 26 million bucks. It's impressive. So as much as we know that there's always a push for us to trim fat and not have any waste whatsoever in the budget, and maybe John can speak to this as somebody who's been around the rodeo a little bit in different systems. When you're coming in under 1%, you're doing pretty well. Would you agree with that, John?
Yeah, Don shared some of this with me earlier this week, but I stayed on because I wanted to hear the presentation. And it's amazing. We always, when I was at my former school, mimicked the same rationale that you're talking about, the same, I call it ethics, the way that you've put the budget together. But to see this at 0.87% is outstanding. And I'm not surprised though, because I am in the district once in a while and I see the way the district operates, and it is outstanding. You're not going to find many school districts that self-regulate and take the initiative that they've taken to be meaningful and intentional in working with the towns on a budget like this. And you have one of the finest school districts I've been in. So it's not like they're skimping on anything educationally for the students. So yes, I agree with you, Andrew. It's a testament to the business office, and I'm sure it's a testament to Andrew's work as well, because it has to be a team. But this is an outstanding presentation, an outstanding budget. And you're not going to see many districts get to this level.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Dawn and Andrew and the whole team. And I want to also add that one of the things, as I've looked, in this district and also in other districts, in talking to other school committee folks and other districts, is that with regard to COVID, I think one of the reasons why we were able to manage it so well is that we have a history of maintaining our physical plants, keeping up with that. I think for a lot of our colleagues in other districts, it's easy and especially as a region where we're under so much pressure, from our funding communities, it's easy to say, you know what, we're gonna skip that this year. We're not gonna replace those filters every year. We're gonna say, and it's really easy to do that because you don't see an immediate cost to kids' experiences. But for us to be able to go have independent audits done of our entire HVAC system and have them say, here's a pretty short list of things that need to change is remarkable. And that is not what played out in a lot of communities. And I would also say that having in both the region and particularly in the elementary schools, having a long-standing commitment to reasonable to kind of small class sizes. And that's a commitment that the taxpayers of these communities have made and paid. I mean, it's expensive to commit to having class sizes the way that we do. And it's the reason that we're able to do the things that we've been able to do this year. And, you know, I just yesterday spoke to a school committee chair in a neighboring community, and she kept saying, like, how? And I said, well, what's your class size? Well, we have 26. What's your classroom spaces? Well, we have X by X. Well, you know, I mean, it's a luxury, and we've, for many years as two communities, made the commitment and the sacrifices that have gotten us to be able to do that. And we're seeing the results. And I mean, never mind, it's like good for kids and good for people to be in healthy buildings and, you know, have small classes. And I hope that we're able to continue to do that. So thank you to all the people who make that a possibility.
Yeah,
Well, I think want to highlight your operating expenditure summary, where we take all of these changes that we just discussed and put them in their category. So I think it's important to see, if you look at that your salary and other compensation increase now is only at 1.98%. So obviously, you know, our contracts are at least 2% plus, you know, steps and lanes. Where by taking the retirement savings, and moving some additional salary money to the grants, we're able to keep that number below. So we're at 1.98%. It's, I think, encouraging to see all the red. Our benefit number is less than our fiscal year 21 budget, as well as our other expenditures. So places where we've added money that we don't need anymore, we do take it out. Transportation, obviously, you know, we have the increase in the contract, which wasn't that much, but we also had to pick up some for special education. And then our buildings and grounds, really, that's where you're seeing the reduction in the phone, the phones, and there must have been one more, insurances. So that's the 2,900. So I think it bodes well for us that we are trimming in some categories and not growing in all categories. The other point I just wanted to make is we've been using this term spend smarter. And, you know, as we know, everything out there in the marketplace continues to increase in pricing, but we're not increasing our budgets because we're learning how to spend smarter. So we're not necessarily using all the same supplies we used to, but we're taking what's happening out in the market, and we're able to manage it internally, so that we're buying the same thing for less money. I will say we've grown, we've really expanded our use of Amazon, which has definitely helped us hugely in just finding textbooks that we need, replacement textbooks and stuff that are so much more reasonable than how we used to do it, by going back to the publisher. So I think that's one way where we've definitely been able to buy more with less by expanding our purchasing venues.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from members of the committee about the budget? Michael, sorry, circling back.
Yeah, well, first, Dawn, thank you again for both the oral and written presentation. It's really helpful to see, I mean, in every section, how things are laid out, and the trending over the years and the comparison versus V1. It's really terrific. Kind of a left field question. Is there still a large difference between the assessment for the Norfolk County retirement and the Middlesex County retirement? This isn't leading anywhere for tonight, but I have something kind of in the back of my mind.
I haven't looked at the Middlesex County retirement in any kind of detail to know if they use the same. I mean, it's sometimes you're not comparing apples to apples. And so you'd almost have to take our covered payroll, right, and put it into their calculation to see where that plays out. So, you know, it's something John and I can look into just for comparison purposes. And John, just so you know, Sherborn actually is in Middlesex County.
Okay.
So our neighboring, you know, we're not all in Norfolk County in the Dover-Sherborn realm. So
Yeah, and the relative funding of each of the systems would play into it as well. You know, if Norfolk's at 50% and Middlesex at 60%, then that's going to influence it. But we can look at the actuarial reports from both of the systems and see if we can make some judgment.
Yeah, that'd be helpful, even if it's, just a kind of very high level
Right.
comparison. That'd be great. And then this is, I may be jumping the gun before capital, but Anna did ask the question about kind of unanticipated COVID-related expenses. I can continue to be concerned about next winter, especially if we're in good shape from a COVID standpoint and we want to stay open, but we still have protocols that we need to follow. And I know that, Andrew, I talked about this in our last joint meeting. But I guess the question is, are there potential expenses associated with ensuring that we can keep open next winter? That would be in the nature of unanticipated expenses and potentially capital expenses.
Do you mind if I answer that, Don?
Go ahead.
So it's interesting that you bring this up, Michael, because I've tucked it away in the back of my head, especially last week when we were going through the buildings to see exactly how we're going to make our reopening scheduled for the 22nd and the 5th, how we're going to make that happen, right? You remember I've talked many times with you guys about infrastructure and, the fact that we've moved into other rooms and, our lunch situations. And, one of the things that I've learned through the years is that there's no substitute for going actually over to a place and walking through it and looking at it with the team of people who are leading the show. And that's exactly what we did. We went through the middle school especially, but also Linquist to examine, the middle schools where we feel we have the greatest issues really with classrooms. They're both very tight. In terms of classroom use, the middle school was the big question mark. But the high school's able to use the middle school gym as a spillover for cafeteria because we have this 6-foot seating and we can only fit 60 people in the cafeteria at a time. Obviously, we need swing spaces. So in this process, some really, really important findings kind of came out. And one was that we were able to move science tables to the middle school gym instead of student desks. And these were a problem because they were all stacked up. You might remember from my slideshow in the presentation, they were all stacked up in some of these internal classrooms. And we didn't want to go out and rent storage, although we could if we had to, but we prefer not to do that. Again, trying not to be wasteful. And so we put those tables down into the one side of the gymnasium. One of my concerns was actually, and I think I mentioned this also in the joint school committee meeting, was that we might have to take over the whole middle school gym. That was my worry, because if we take over the whole middle school gym, then where's gym class going to take place? Obviously, if the weather's nice, they can go outside, but what about when it's raining? And it rains a lot in the spring. So that was a real worry of ours. And what we found out was that when we moved those science tables, we did pick up extra seating in there, and we solved the problem of getting rid of the tables, A. And B, we started thinking more about Linquist Commons and whether or not we could swing some seating out of the auditorium. And the original thinking was between the lower section of the auditorium and the upper section of the auditorium, could we put tables or seats up there just for additional seating? And what we concluded at the end of the day was that we could take a section of the auditorium, and granted, it may mean that we have to paint the floors afterwards. We may have to have the upholstery cleaned, but as an alternative, as a swing space on particularly inclement days where we have inclement weather, it provides us with a really viable option that's not disruptive and can reduce some of the pressure on the building. So to your point, Michael, the question really was, are we going to need more classroom space, or are we going to need more space to accommodate our students for next year? I think, and I think Don would agree, based on what we just went through this process, that we actually are going to be okay. And the good news is that we'll find out this spring as we test it out. And if in fact we're okay, then we think we're going to be good for next year. God forbid we go back into something like this. Does that cover it, Dawn, would you say?
Mhm.
And Michael, does that answer your question? I mean, I do think long-term as a system, you know, you might be, it might be in the system's best interest to look at the courtyard at the high school and consider whether you could get any classroom space out of that at some point. And that would be something where you could consider bringing someone in to do a building usage study, or architects to just review what you have. And they do a great job of giving you an assessment of any capacity issues that you have or can anticipate. I don't think we're in a desperate mode. I've been in a desperate mode when we were in Wellesley. Those of you who know, the old Wellesley High School was built in '38. We needed classrooms. We had burgeoning enrollments, and the problem was at the doorstep. Like, they were coming in a year. And they were talking about putting 3-deckers of portable classrooms. It ended up, we went through the building, we looked at our spaces, and we came up with alternatives. And we generated, I think it was 8 and maybe even 10 classrooms from within the building that nobody had really thought about. And the same holds true at the region. So in the middle school, for example, there are 2 classrooms that come to mind for me, that if you were in a jam, really in a jam, you could build a wall up the middle of those classrooms, and with very little additional work. A partition wall is not a big deal. It's not a huge cost. You could probably absorb it in your operating budget if you had to. And you could gain 2 new classrooms. And the reason we're having classroom problems, it's not so much because if you look at the numbers, when I graduated from high school, there were 880, and the next year it was 200, all at Dover-Sherborn. So clearly we were making it. The difference is that we're utilizing our spaces differently with special ed programming primarily, and that requires people, office spaces, small group classrooms. And so I do think that as a system, you do need to think about that in the coming years. I don't think it would be a terrible thing, and I think you could do it at a reasonable cost of perhaps putting some partition walls at the middle school and perhaps doing something in the courtyard, and that would get you through any future pressures. Because I don't think you're gonna see, you know, thousands of students arriving in Dover-Sherborn, but you might feel some pressure in the coming years.
So I guess I'll just reiterate that I'd love to have an insurance policy or safety net, so we don't end up with surprises that we're jammed with, and we don't have options because we ran out of time. So yeah, the thinking again is there anything that could be done for next winter that would also have a long-term benefit? And can be utilized whether or not it's needed next winter. And I guess just a quick reaction to the, and it sounds interesting, taking advantage of the Lindquist space. I'm assuming that from a fire health safety perspective, that's okay to populate that center space with tables?
Oh, no, we're not doing that. We don't have to do that. We're going to use the seats.
Okay.
We're not putting tables in the, that was like what an option not to use the seats. But then when we went in, and actually again, that's where being physically in a space with everyone, we're like, you know, there's cement floors here. Like, what do we have to lose just to spread the kids out in the seating? We even talked about, you know, there's that beautiful projector we have there, or, you know, running a fun little movies or something to make it a little more entertaining because you're in there. So I think that, and we also feel like it's a short period of a short window of time that we're going to have to use the auditorium for overflow, because once it's nice out, we saw what the campus looked like in the fall. There were very few kids in either one of our cafeterias because they were all outside. And so we're looking at maybe less than a month of time that we think we're going to have an overflow for cafeteria. seating. So,
But to Michael's point, the winters, if we were in this jam next winter, what would that mean? But I think what I'm trying to say, Michael, is that what happened because I made that announcement of this further expansion of reopening. Of course, there's that initial reaction of, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? We can't do this. We're never going to be able to do this. But then, as we always do at DS, we start to settle in and say, okay, well then what is it we would have to do? Like, we're pretty good problem solvers here. And when we started to walk around and look at the ways we could solve some of these problems, I still think there are other spaces and that could be utilized differently. I'm just saying that in terms of offering the optimal situation, you might want to look at that courtyard at some point in terms of having, so that you don't have teachers traveling with carts, for example. I mean, in the perfect school, every teacher has their own classroom. That's not typical, and that hasn't been the way for Dover-Sherborn for a long time because we're, it's just not super spacious.
Judy?
Just want to say, Dawn, you are amazing. You got us through this year. You gave us an incredible budget for next year. The increase is less than 1%. I don't believe that anyone could be anything but ecstatic with the work that you do. Thank you so much.
well, thank you. And it's all, I'm just managing the variables out there. So we had luck on our side for this year's budget, but I am pleased at where it came in, and hopefully the towns are feeling a little bit of relief from any financial issues they may have from this version 2.0 that we were able to bring forward. So we will be able to share this with them tomorrow night. And as I said, we'll have, I got to update the PowerPoint that I gave you guys in December, but now I have all the new numbers. So I'll have a little bit of a different story, but we won't walk through all of these changes from 1 to 2. We're just going to present 2 like it is our budget, just to make things simpler. But I wanted you guys to feel comfortable with where we were between the 2 versions, which is usually what we do with this meeting. The other thing I have for you tonight is we've continued to get updated quotes for our capital projects. So since the last time we met, I have actually gotten updated quotes for the hot water systems at both the middle school and the high school, where we actually gave the contractor the number of sinks and bathrooms, and that's the detailed level that they built the new quotes from. The great news is that the placeholders we were holding were adequate. At the high school, we had 90,000, it went down to 87.5. But the great news was that the middle school, because it has smaller capacity hot water systems, went down to 48,000. So your total capital requests for fiscal year 22 now sits at $355,500 with those adjustments to the hot water systems. In addition, Maggie and I presented your capital request to the Dover Capital Committee, which then they requested that we reach out to the Green Community reps, which Paul and I did have a meeting with Gino Carlucci from the Green Community, and there is definitely funding opportunities for the hot water systems. And so Gino was going to send us the framework of the application to start that. He seemed to believe we might be able to get it all funded. The issue with it, though, is the timing. The high school hot water heaters actually have been problematic recently, and so we are very anxious to be able to replace them. So we have to figure out how we're going to manage that. If I have to, he thought there was a possibility we wouldn't be able to know we have the funding by the summer, and so I can't wait till next summer. So we'll see if we can speed that up. But I wanted the committee to know that we have reached out and are looking at the opportunities for green community grants, because both Dover and Sherborn are green community. The region is eligible to apply for those grants. So we'll be pursuing that. And I am recommending, so we'll vote on all of the stuff next week, but I am recommending, based on where we stand financially this year, is that for at least one last year, the school committee, the region funds capital with E&D. Obviously going forward, the numbers are much larger and there's no way in heck we'd be able to fund the $1 million for the 2 million. So I think this is the last year we can do that, but we're in an opportunity, or we're in a situation where I think we will have the funding to do it. And so it definitely allows us a little more flexibility with the timing of these projects. And that would be the recommendation, and we can further explore that with the two towns tomorrow night.
Questions about capital budget? Yeah, Anne, and then I think Michael.
Sorry, Michael, I always seem to get my hand up just a second for you.
Little.
Is there anything that we can be doing, John, or anything further that we can be doing, looking ahead to when we know we're going to need to be borrowing money to improve our rating, or to do things that would help save money then?
So most likely, if we continued with the IMA situation, the region itself probably wouldn't take off the loans, right? That we would, the towns then would decide how they'd want to move forward. And so the IMA, we haven't actually tested out the IMA with a substantially large capital number yet. But I think that was the thought process when that came on board back in 2014, was to not have the region take out debt, but to have the two towns have that opportunity to decide how they would like to proceed. So again, with the bigger numbers coming down the road, we'll just have to see how they still view that. But I would assume that we would probably go that way and continue with the IMA. I think all three of us entities are in excellent position for bond valuing and what interest rates we would get. So that's to all of our credits that we are in situation. I think we would be highly rated.
All right, great.
The other thing is that we're looking at, remember, we've had started engaging with Amoresco, so the energy sustainability company. And so we'd be working with it there's opportunities for some of these projects to get funding through a Section 25A. And so we will be exploring that too for some of these larger projects like the boilers in the future, and some of the other projects that lends itself to energy savings, and therefore you can go get sustainability funding for those projects if you go down the right path. So there's lots of exploration to be had to potentially offset the total amounts that we'd have to ask the towns for.
Michael.
Related question is it worthwhile to analyze and potentially have some discussions with the towns about bringing projects forward that don't need to be brought forward, but taking advantage of a very unusual funding environment where we don't know how long we're going to have really cheap money, but we certainly have it now, and we'll probably have it into or through next year.
For funding some of these projects, you mean?
Yeah, okay, let's do a bond offering, a year early or 2 years early, and do the projects a year or 2 years early. Now, clearly, you're losing money on the useful life, but are you are you in the long run saving a lot more money with the the cost of borrowing? Yeah.
Right. I think you'd have to offset, the cost. We're not talking like huge amounts of money, so you'd have to offset are we ready to take that project on? Because some of these larger projects are going to take, like we started now the path for the larger rooftops at the middle school. So we've got someone working with us. So we're now, that's probably like almost a 2-year process, to get that to a point where you're ready to roll. So I think that we could definitely look at that, but I look at I just remember what the engineers had said to us about some of our HVAC equipment, and where I was telling them it was on our replacement cycle, and they're like, I don't know, like the way you maintain your equipment here, I think that you still have more life. So you'd have to weigh that out. Like you said, do we want to take off some years that we could continue to have the existing equipment, just to take advantage of a lower interest rate?
Yeah,
So
I don't know how that would look, but
Right.
it's kind of along the lines of spend
yeah,
smart.
but I
right?
think the towns do it too in a way to combine projects, right? So like if they're going to go out and bond and they like to, let's put it all in this year so we can go do it once. So I do know Dover's talked about that in the past with us to sort of plan, and that's one of the reasons why we do these 5-year plans for all 3 school districts and share them with the towns, because it does allow them to look at the whole town level and give us and have that discussion as to how we could potentially proceed. So we would definitely include them in any of those discussions, and would be willing to move some of our projects around if they felt like there was some benefit based on what they have coming down the road too. But all great things to think about.
I guess the only other question that I have with regard to capital purchases, and it's sort of related to Michael's question about, do we have more building needs or whatever related to COVID? But as I think about, sort of the next 10 years, right? Like the next strategic plan, the work that we've done on Portrait of a Graduate, like what are the learning spaces that we need for the next millennium? And God, I hope that we don't have to continue to keep kids in like little pods all the time far away. But, if we're talking about learning labs or, spaces that are different than the spaces that we need now, is that a good idea to the next strategic plan be thinking about, our physical plant as well? And to what extent it within reasonable means meets the
Right.
needs of the next generation of learning?
And that is in our current strategic plan, to look at the innovative classroom space and how we need to change the building. I mean, language labs are almost becoming obsolete, right? So we're looking at different ways, even computer labs now at the middle school, because they all have their one-to-one. So there's a lot of spaces that can be redeployed and reconfigured, I think, to meet the needs. And I think that's what Andrew and I saw too. I mean, the computer lab is huge over there. It could definitely be two classrooms if we need to be creative about spaces. So I'm excited to hopefully that we'll get back to where we can take all the innovative furniture that's in all the storage bins and put it back in the classrooms. I mean, thank goodness, all I can do is say, thank goodness we decided to keep those desks and get a storage. Because
nice desks. Okay.
They have come in handy. In fact, a good chunk of your guys' desks are sitting over at Pine Hill right now, because we are using our resources and deploying where we can. And if I need to bring some of them back, we will, but it's just been a godsend that we've had some of these old-fashioned desks sort of tucked away at some of these schools, that we could bring them back out for this year and probably next year is what we're thinking. But we'll be excited to just do another little trade and get the old stuff back.
This is one of those side benefits of having of going through this process now in March and April, is that this is going to position us well as a system for next September. I don't think any of us want to go through what we went through last summer. I would much rather we be prepared. And I think that this return is actually really going to get us that much closer. And to that end, I don't know if you guys heard this afternoon, the governor and the commissioner are now pushing for a much or increases to in-person learning. The details are still not fully out there, and I don't know, maybe I didn't hear them, but I wasn't quite sure if it was K5 or K8. Either way, we're in good shape. If we had to pivot a little further, we could. But I'm glad that we're having those conversations, and I'm glad we've been looking at those spaces. We made good use of this past week.
Just on that note, and I mean, and I don't want to leave us from capital budget if people have other questions. Anything percolating? On the note of the reopening, and you've talked a little bit about some of the stuff you've been doing in the past week since the last that we met and talked about it, but Do you have any other sort of updates or things to share? I'm wondering specifically, what have we heard in terms of response for pool testing and interest among faculty and families, and you know, where are we on our different steps?
Sorry, I just need to check on that muting. So yes, actually, we do have our data in terms of consents for participation in pool testing at the middle school and high school. And I actually have that info right in front of me. So if it's okay with you, Maggie, I'll just go right through it. So middle school students, 122 consented. That's 23.9% of the total population. Middle school staff, 18 consented. That's 16.9% of the staff. High school students, 143 consented. That's 21.4% of the population. And high school staff, 31 consented, which is 19.8%. So definitely not the numbers that we were looking for. It was a little surprising. I have to admit, I was especially surprised by, quite honestly, the teachers' numbers. You know, I thought those numbers would be higher. We're still going to go forward with it. We think it's worth doing. We think part of the challenge with pool testing is getting people to come along. We think that once it gets going, that others will come on board. And we've gone pretty far down the road. We could stop it if we wanted to, but I think it's important, especially to those who do have kind of serious lingering concerns. I think this is one way to alleviate some of those. Again, it's just another layer of protection. It's not an end all. But so there's that, and then obviously what I just mentioned about the work within the building. So yeah, we're making progress. We've got our eye on that. We can obviously give you another update next week. But that's kind of where we are right now.
I know one of the questions that's come up from a few folks in the community that I did say that I would check into, and I know you and I were able to talk about it earlier today, but can you just, I know in the middle school and the high school, we have interior classrooms, and that, you know, I have some families that, you know, they've had kids go through, you know, middle school especially, and been worried about the interior classrooms. What can you share anything about just sort of you know, I know we have the MERV filters in there, and just sort of what we're seeing, and are we able to measure the air circulation and what we're doing to make sure those classrooms are okay for human consumption?
Absolutely. So, you know, when we started this process back in the fall, we wanted answers to those questions. We wanted answers to the questions around MERV 13s. We wanted answers to the questions around our interior classrooms. And so we went to the folks who handle our HVAC, which is Victory Heating and Air Conditioning. And they've been our folks for probably a decade, Don, or longer?
Yeah, on and off.
On and off. Okay, so, but that's primarily who's been servicing our units. And as Don said, we've gotten feedback that they're in better shape than we would have thought given their age, but that has a lot to do with the fact that they're well maintained. So we have a pretty good relationship with these guys, and we ask them these very questions. And, you know how it is. There's no experts in your family, and we're not experts in the eyes of a lot of people, and neither were Victory. So the Dover Board of Health insisted, honestly, that we have an outside agency come in and check our HVAC systems. And we took advantage of it and did it in Sherborn as well, at Pine Hill. And we got a pretty detailed report about our units, and specifically answers to our questions about use of interior classrooms. And they said we would be perfectly fine using those interior classrooms. The air exchange is plenty good enough, and in fact, very good. And that was music to our ears, because now it was confirmed for a second time. That said, we think that it makes sense, speaking of layers of protection, just to ease the concerns of those who still aren't going to buy that explanation, to also put the air purifiers in those rooms that we've been using. We use them in the central office. We use them throughout the system.
They're in
Pine
every
Hill's-
classroom at Pine Hill. So
every classroom at Pine Hill. They're, they work really well. If you've been into the central office, you've seen them. They, I think, just provide people with a better sense of security. So we would put those in as well. And remember, again, as we get warmer, we can open our windows. Unfortunately, opening the windows wasn't real popular a few years ago. People prefer air conditioning, right? So we air condition the place. Now we're going to want the windows open, hot or cold. But we think that those spaces are going to be fine.
right, so we're looking at the air purifiers, and as Andrew said before, it's like an added layer since those classrooms don't have windows. So that's they don't have the ability to open the windows. So this will give them that additional layer to compensate for not having the windows. But basically, any space in our buildings have adequate air exchange. They've all been upgraded. In fact, we're getting ready to do the replacement of the old MERV 13s that we put back in last spring, or actually before the summer, with the new ones, because it's typically in March, right before pollen season starts, is when we change our filters again. So it's hard to believe. And we've also already informed our HVAC company that at least for like the next year and a half, 2 years, to upgrade our contract to include the higher level MERV filters, because we see that this will be something that we'll continue with for a little longer. So that's they'll price us out with those increased level of MERV filters instead of the 8s and 10s that we used to use.
So what I'm even hearing you say is that even in the classrooms, like even if the person in the classroom, in charge of the classroom, like wanted the air conditioning and it's running and they didn't open the window, that we're still getting enough air circulation. The window is just an additional.
Added, exactly. It's just an added layer.
Okay.
Right. I mean, because if you think about it, Maggie, when you air condition a building, it's intended to have all the windows closed. And obviously that air is supposed to be safe. So it was built with that in mind.
Yeah. All right. Thank you on those points. And thank you for the work that we're doing along the way to, just sort of untangle the other issues, and do keep in touch with us if you find roadblocks.
And one other quick point, Maggie, we are also scheduled to have meetings with our faculty on, that was brought up at the joint school committee meeting. We do have meetings with the faculty, a morning meeting and an afternoon meeting on Thursday. Once again, our health and hygiene folks are coming through for us in a huge way to answer questions for people around vaccinations and the safety of all this and double masking and all those kinds of questions. And obviously, we anticipate questions like the one you just asked. And so we'll be there as well. And then we're planning to do those for families next week.
Thank you. Appreciate all the work on all the for all the folks who are doing all the work to get ready for changes that come down the pike. So thank you. Any other further discussion on any of these points? Great. Moving on to the consent agenda. We have 2 items on the consent agenda: the minutes from the February 2nd, 2021 regional school committee meeting, and a list of a couple donations. Specifically, a donation of $5,000 that was given from the boosters to the METCO program to support the METCO program, and the donations from a couple of our sports teams, basketball, girls and boys basketball, to support their assistant coaches, their volunteer coaches. Questions about any of the consent agenda? Okay, in that case, it's an action required. If you could just take yourselves off mute. Do I have a motion to accept the consent agenda as stated? Lynn Collins. Motion made by Lynn Collins, second.
Second,
Second made by Judy Miller. Roll call vote. Michael Jaffe,
Michael Jaffe, yes.
Lynn Collins,
Collins, yes.
Judy Miller,
Judy Miller, yes.
Ann Hovey,
And have a yes.
Maggie Sharon, yes, and Kate Potter's not with us tonight. Before we adjourn, I just wanted to say on behalf of Kate, she's sorry that she could not join us this evening. She actually has been able to attend on our collective behalf, and as a member of the DS8 committee, the Mass Association of School Committee was hosting an evening tonight, a discussion on bias, inclusive practices, diversity and equity, and she had asked permission to miss our meeting so that she could go and learn and bring back to our group the information she learned there, and we thought that would be appropriate and a great idea. So she has had a chance to read the audit and will send you any questions, Dawn, that she has. And on that note, the school committees have been approached by a few members of DS Aid and invited to see whether or not we'd be interested in attending a retreat so that we ourselves can learn a little bit more about anti-racism and bias. The retreat that has been suggested and that I would suggest that we participate in is being organized by Ms. Francie Latour, who's a member of DS8 and a Sherborn resident. She's the current director of DEI at the Inley School. And I think that we all could use some time to think about these important issues. I know that we're supporting DS8 in their work and in our work in the community. So, you know, with your blessing, I've said that we'll pencil in March 23rd for the evening of March 23rd for that workshop. It won't be a whole open meeting because it's our professional development, so it doesn't fall under open meeting law. And I know that the other local school committees will also be inviting their members to participate as well. Feel free to reach out to me outside, you know, questions or thoughts or concerns. Any other further comments from the committee before we adjourn? Great. I would love to entertain a motion to adjourn.
Judy Miller, so moved.
Judy Miller, second.
Second, Ann Hovey.
Ann Hovey, so quick on the draw. Fantastic. Unmute yourselves, please. Ann Hovey,
Ann Hovey, yes.
Lynn Collins,
Collins, yes.
Judy Miller,
Judy Miller, yes.
Michael Jaffe,
Jaffe, yes.
and Maggie Sharon, yes. And at 8:05, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful night.